Yep.
Okay, I think we'll start now. Can I welcome you to our latest distinguished lecture, probably the last of this year's academic year. And we have the wonderful Dan Russell, who
lower your expectations.
Who is on his page calls himself the Uber Tech Lead for Search Quality and User Happiness in Mountain View. What a wonderful title! I want to know what Uber Tech Lead stands for, and apparently it's used mainly in Google to stand for technical direction and people management. So not just the technical, but you have to manage people as well. Dan has an illustrious career. He's worked in all sorts of places, including IBM and Park, and been very creative and inventive. But I know him from my time when I worked at Apple over in Cupertino. And Dan was my boss, and he ran a user experience research group in the Advanced Technology Group. And on my way to the canteen, Dan took me for lunch, and we were based in one internet booth, which has always amazed me. We walked, it's about 5 minutes to the canteen, and Dan was, welcoming me and saying wonderful things about Apple and what you can do. He said, everyone who works at Apple can have 20 ideas from walking from one internet booth to the canteen, to the refectory. The key is knowing which of those 20 great ideas to follow and champion. So we were just in my room, and he noticed I had this. Anyone know what this is?
It's the laptop.
No, it's not a laptop. It precedes a laptop. It's an e-note. This wonderful device here, it's probably worth about $15,000 on eBay. It's very rare. Anyway, Dan said, "Oh, I see you've got one of those." And it came out in the late 90s. And he said to me, he invented the handle. That was one of his great ideas. So without further ado, I shall now hand over to Dan, who's going to talk about understanding user behavior at 3 scales.
Thank you. So I have to admit to you, I'm actually not much of a gamer. I don't like playing cards. I really don't care for many computer games. Role-playing games sort of leave me cold. And yet I'm going to talk to you today about a game that I built. And it's called googleaday.com. I don't know, has anybody played it? Anybody been on it? Okay, one person. So that's my game. And I'll tell you why I did that and what we did in the process of doing that. But the reason I did this game is because I want to help people learn how to search more effectively. And that's what this entire talk is about, is how do we do this, and how do we actually understand what people are really doing, thinking, and feeling about the products we build, about the systems we create. And so what I ended up doing was, as I said, building this system. And see if I can't get this. I'm going to show you sort of the original marketing video that came out about it. Let's see if this will play here for me.
A Google a Day, a new search initiative. We set out to make users more savvy and creative searchers by demonstrating the power of search. We came up with a Google a Day, a daily trivia puzzle that can be solved using clever search skills. We wanted to educate without lecturing, so we had to come up with some fun questions that could be answered with a Google search. But not just one search or one kind of search, which would be too easy. We want to teach users about all the cool kinds of searches they can do. And that was the easy part. Then we needed to figure out how to freeze time. To avoid spoilers, our engineers put a time restriction on searches, disallowing results newer than a week old. We call it Deja Google, and it's the first time Google's done anything like this. We teamed up with the New York Times to get the word out, printing the Google of the Day, every weekday, right above the world-famous crossword puzzle. No one has ever advertised above the crossword puzzle before, a first for both the New York Times and Google. And we're running dynamic banner ads across the web that change every day to show the latest question. Google Taiwan just launched their own version. We think the results speak for themselves. With over 552,000 unique users, 26% of users return to play again. And the average time on the site is 6 minutes. With over 75 articles written and 2 publishers syndicating our content, people are talking.
So that was the marketing video that we put out. I think it was about a month after we launched the game. So all the numbers you saw there, they're all wrong. But I'll show you the updated numbers, because what I want to do in this little time we've got is kind of walk you through a little bit of the process we went through in designing and building this. So this was actually the first concept mock. It looks a little different than that, right? I mean, we basically threw up every idea we had on the screen. So we had the question, we had categories, we had difficulty levels. What's interesting about this is that the final form actually has almost all these components, but in a much more visually appealing form. This is very overwrought in some ways. So we did that, and a few months later we did the phase 2 mocks. I actually worked with a designer on this, a visual designer, and we had animation, we had beautiful layout and nice typography. And by the time we actually launched it in April of 2011, this is the way it looked. And keep in mind this visual appearance, because it's going to change a lot as we go through this process. But basically down here, you had the question. You could actually go backwards in time and see yesterday's question and so on. You then do the searches up here. I framed the search engine, which was tricky, let me tell you. But you could put your query then, it would scroll, you would update. You would then type the answer or copy paste it in there. You would then do a match to see if you got it right. Straightforward, right? So a little bit later, we did another visual refresh here, and we added the ability to start to track your points. We added different iconography for different kinds of questions. You could do 6 questions per day. You had the unlocked levels. Does this sound like a game to you? We're adding all the mechanics that we know from games, and so what that meant for me was I had to go play a lot of computer games. That was the hard part of this project. So we kept evolving this, and we did a bunch of other things. And among these things is we added a kind of social component to it. So games are often best played en masse or with your friends. And so here's the video we made for that to promote this. And this is about, I guess, about a year later.
Trivia is pretty great, from the board to the pub quiz. But there's always one thing holding you back. And no, it's not just Todd. It's the rule, no using Google. We didn't think that was fair because, hey, we're Google. We want to play too. So we made our own trivia game and used search as part of the challenge. We call it a Google a day. Each day, we create new questions in a boatload of categories meant to be solved with nothing but savvy search skills. So a search might lead you from a birth date to a band to an album and then your answer. Or from a totally different direction. There are hundreds of ways to solve, but only one right answer. And the faster you search, the more points you score, so being creative in your search is part of the challenge. Unlock badges for search prowess, then share scores with friends on Google+. Even Todd. Because while he's lame at pub quiz, it turns out Todd's pretty rad at search. Good work, Todd. Your brain plus search. 24 hours a day, head-to-head against your friends. Search on, smarty pants.
So we did that. And we added in all of the share your results with your friends, spam your friends with your updated scores, all that stuff, right? And it worked out pretty well. We were happy with it. You can see also we did another round of visual redesign. Now you can do 9 questions. Your friends can show up there. You can actually challenge individuals. You can challenge groups, et cetera, et cetera. Every time a new capability came out in the game API for G+, come on. You've only missed 2 videos, so it's okay. But what we did is we kept augmenting the game to support things. We would have stars and banners and animations, and it was marvelous. We had a great time with this. So by this point, we now have player lists. You can join groups and play against groups of friends. And it's basically taking this key idea of teaching someone how to search and how to do interesting little problems to the large. But my goal, really, as a search user experience researcher, is to teach you how to search more effectively, make you a smarter person. Right? We started to lose that a little bit. That was sort of too bad. But it was a lot of fun, and we ended up with a lot of people playing this. Now, in this whole design iteration process, this is now the first year and a half. And I have to preface this by saying this game was supposed to last for 3 months. It was a 1-quarter trial run. And we sort of thought, well, that's great. We'll do it for 3 months. We'll be done. So I wrote 1,000 questions, and we were great. And then at the end of 3 months, the search marketing people came to me and said, you know, you've got millions of people come to this site. We can't just turn it off. We're going to get into bed with New York Times and run our ads there every day for the next year minimum. So it's still running, and that was almost 4 years ago now. So you never know when these little tiny projects you take on will blossom into a life of their own. And that's what happened here. In the process of doing this, I came up with a few insights I want to share with you. And these are sort of insights about creativity, about design practice, and about building these things, like this tiny little startup. The first axiom I want to give you is that with respect to design, intuitions are terrible. Your intuitions suck. They're not just bad, they're terrible. And the reason is really interesting because, in particular, your intuitions are terrible, right? I mean, we all have this sort of folk knowledge that intuitive design is the best design, right? That there could be the lead designer, the star designer who will come out with the perfect iPhone or the perfect whatever, right? So that's why we do studies. Because it's best if you design grounded in the crucible of reality. If you actually watch people using your stuff and take those lessons back and iterate quickly. So the first fallacy I heard a lot of was, it's intuitive because that's the way I would do it, right? Think about that for a second. The second most common fallacy I heard a lot was, well, that's the way my mom would do it, right? Your mother is not representative either. In fact, the deep truth is you are statistically insignificant. You really are. So your intuitions and your mom's intuitions, they kind of don't really count for much. So the deeper truth is you're a couple sigma away from the mean. Okay? The fact that you understood what that sentence meant shows you how far away from the average you really are. Okay? And furthermore, so are your friends. So when you live in a bubble, you may not even see the bubble. It's like the fish in the water, right? So what we do is we live in a world where our intuitions really do fail us. You know, I know Malcolm Gladwell is a god, but there's a lot about the folklore of intuition and folklore of intuitive design. This is not true. We live in a world of biases. We have confirmation bias, where we want to see the thing we believe to be true. We have sampling bias, and that's probably the biggest one that we live in, where we sample our friends, we sample our next-door neighbors, but they all live in London, or they all live in Palo Alto. Those are not representative samples by any means. I can go on and on. If we can do a whole lecture just on this one slide, right? But we have to understand what we have to do, because the biggest problem is that aggregated end-user behavior in the small, which is what our friends are, our intuitions are, is this tiny, small number. So in fact, what we do when we think about designing products is we have to understand, we want to do the analysis to understand what our players are doing, what our users are doing. So the biggest issue there is they not only have positive experiences, they also have trials and tribulations. They have times when they just want to shake the computer and throw it out the window. Have you ever done a study where someone did that? Okay? It's really interesting. I've been on a lot of field studies. Yvonne and I were talking about this earlier. And it's really something when you're sitting with someone in their house, and it's late on an August night, it's really hot, and they're using your advanced user interface, and they go to the page, and they literally shriek. I wish I had the video I could play you, but it's really surprising. Like, I hate this, she said, and immediately hit the back button. That's a profound moment for a designer, right? When they take your beautifully crafted thing and reject it out of hand. It's a critical moment. So there's a lot of stuff like that. And so this really what I want to communicate to you today is it's not enough for us to sit here and design these things or to create them in one of our labs. It's enough. What we need to do is actually look at what people do. And I want to argue there's actually multiple levels of detail, of abstraction, of scale that we have to use to do that. So let me give you what I think of as 3 different views, or 3 different scales of user data. So it's kind of obvious. These are, in some sense, time scales, but they're also data quantity scales. So there's the microscopic scale, right, where we're looking at behavior at the lowest level of detail, millisecond by millisecond by millisecond. What are they clicking on? What are they not clicking on? What are they looking at? What are they not looking at? Then there's the sort of mesoscale, which is looking at people and their behavior from the scale of minutes to days. Okay. So if you think about it in terms of data quantity, you can only do so much microanalysis, just because it creates a lot of data, and it's just painful to do a very large N. You can do probably 10 times the number of mesoscale, say field studies or so on. And then at the top scale, we've got these macro scales. We do millions of observations with logs analysis. I'll show you what I mean by each of these. So, for example, in the microscopic, we do eye tracking studies. I want to see where your eye is looking on the page and what you're not seeing. When I do field studies, that's the meso level. I go out to watch you using my product in the natural habitat, okay? Because there's a huge bias in bringing people here. You bring someone here to UCL, sit them in a lab, and they want to make you very happy, so they will tell you anything. When I bring people to the Googleplex, I'm in Google, I'm in the heart of Google. They will do anything, anything. And so it's not a really useful measure. But the last kind of macro analysis is looking at sessions or looking at people using our products on the scale of millions, thousands to millions. So let me amplify each of these. Okay? So in eye tracking, we bring people into our usability lab. And what we're looking for is actually their sort of precognitive behavior. So this is our lab. And what we do is we bring people into this beautifully lighted area, and we have a one-way window, and we have cameras, and we have this is the eye tracker built in there. And we watch as people use the product. So an eye tracking session looks something like this. And let me play this video for you. And the red dot is where...
What's something different about this Google page from when you normally use it at home? Yeah.
Notice anything different about this page?
Well, it seems that the order of it is cleaner to read. Okay. It's like, you know, it's like... I don't know, it's not, it's more, it's, to me it looks like it's typewritten differently than what my page is at home. Okay. I mean, it's like more information on...
Let me pause it there for a second. Anybody see what the big difference is here?
As an inlet app.
True, but that we still do that now. And it's a different color, you're right. This is actually a couple years ago, so there's a few differences. The big difference is that we put these triangles here. Okay? Now, I'm going to let the video run a little bit more. Watch where her eye goes.
The ones that are at home, or they're just, it just looks different. It's cleaner and neater looking to me. Okay. Easier to read. Yeah? Yeah. Okay, good.
Easier to read.
Do you also notice, did you ever notice these little triangles before? No, I haven't. That's something new, and maybe that means that it's got a different type of rating or something. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I would probably... I'll click on it and see what happens,
Okay,
I guess.
okay. Stop. We put these big blue triangles on the page, and we ran 12 people in a row. Not one person saw them. Not one. Instead, they gave all this blather about how it's more cleanly typewritten, and we changed the colors, and they're confabulating. That's the fancy word for lying. They're making stuff up, right? Because it's very difficult to be articulate about your precognitive, your perceptual behavior. So we ran 12 people through this, not one side. We stopped that shipment. We were not going to ship this. This never showed up, right? You never saw this, trust me. Okay? So here what we're trying to do in this millisecond microscopic level is to see sort of what's true, innately true about humans. How do they read? What do they see? What do they not see? So one of the methods we use is to compute heat maps. And here's, this is work by Vidya Navalgopal, and what she's done is looking at how people are looking and spending their attention on the page. And so here's one layout, and here's another layout. So this thing on the right is called the knowledge panel. Guess what? When you put a big, attractive thing with people's faces on the right-hand side, they spend more time looking over there. But it's a constant amount of time, so you're actually stealing from the left-hand side. Okay? You have to understand this is an inevitable consequence of putting big, visually attractive things on the right. Okay? So what we're doing is crafting visual attention in our designs. Okay? This is what visual information hierarchy is all about. How do you choose what to put and where and why? Okay? Interesting note, this kind of analysis varies culture to culture. If you go look at a Korean web page, it's very different. The layout, for example, of Naver.kr, which is our competitor in Korea, looks very, very different. And so there's a huge amount of cultural expectations built into these things. But we're looking at this behavior at the, like I said, a very microscopic level. Here are 4 eye track studies done side by side. I did this at Disney World in Orlando, Florida. And I ran probably 100 people through, asking them to do various tasks. And what's interesting about this is we're looking to see how often people look at the ads. Answer, none. They always skip over the ads. But the other interesting thing we learned is they skip over the ads in their first movement. Read, 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 and then come back to the ads. Okay? So the time to first click on an ad is always in the multiples of seconds. I know it doesn't sound long, but trust me, it's long. It's long. Okay? So we do this, and we start to discover, if we look at a Google a day, where people spend their time. This is just the saccade pattern laid out numerically. You can see they read down here, and this is all the time they spend searching. Okay? And occasionally they go up to the upper right, only because we have a visually very bare field. And what we've got up there are some distractors. We do the same thing by doing a heat map with that. Again, you can see this sort of thing. So when you put an icon here with some stuff, people look at it. Okay? Almost every visual element you put on the page will at some point attract visual attention. When do you want that to happen? How do you, as a designer, build that into your design? So let's move up one level to the meso level. Okay? Field studies. Right? You go out, you sit with someone, either for an hour or 2 or a day or a week or whatever, and become part of what they're doing. Importantly, this is not bringing people into the lab. They don't come to your place, you go to theirs. So I do a lot of these. I've done about 300 just on search in the past few years. And there's a huge amount of interesting behavior here, including people yelling at your interface. Right? There's a really interesting set of things. So I asked a lot of people this question: how does the search engine work? And here she's saying, you know, I don't know. And I used to work at a search engine company. It's really fascinating to hold these kinds of things. You will learn stuff about your product you didn't think was possible, for good and for bad. So these things are really critical, because I want to show you a quick, this is one clip from a field study I did, and I got authorization from a participant here to do this. I asked her the question, which actor or actress won the most Academy Awards in the history of the Oscars? Just find it for me, right? And so this is her very first query, actor most Oscars, and this is her last query. Now, this is the transcript of what she says. And let me just play the video for you, because it's interesting to listen to what she says.
So this is celebrity with most Oscars. So actor, most, I'm just going to try that out.
So that's her first query.
Oscars. Don't know. Mm-hmm. News results for actor most Oscars. Oh. Oh, and then that would be currently, Brokeback, Brighter Voices, Truth and Oscars Relevance. I don't know. Then you get a lot of weird things. Hold on. Are Filipinos ready for gay flicks? How does that have to do with what I just did? So that's where you can get surprised. You're like, where is this? How does this relate?
So she's really stuck.
bond, I would think. So, I don't know, it's interesting.
Okay, hold on just a second. Let me ask you a quick question.
Uh-huh.
When you clicked on news, I think it was the news or something,
Uh-huh.
did you realize that you were in the news section?
Oh, no, I didn't. How'd I get that? Oh. No, I didn't.
So I have to point out she's a very smart person. She has a graduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania. She has her own website. She runs her own television show. She's pretty savvy about these things. And yet, she did a very common thing, which she is in news, Google News, and she got stuck in the mode of news. This happens all the time. I just happened to catch it on video with her. Happens all the time. How can we help by redesigning our product to avoid this? This is not her problem. This is our problem. Right? We need to take lessons like this and turn them into actions that change the way visual design is done. So this is a few months after we launched the Google Day, and I did, in this case, a usability study. I brought some in the lab and asked them this question. Well, it'll explain itself.
To play a Google a Day, you just have to answer a simple question.
Okay, so I have no idea what a Lepidoptera is, and I am sure that I am just killing the pronunciation. So let me go on to the next. I see an answer, or in this parenthetical, that this pertains to moths and butterflies. So, oh, but it's this particular member. Okay. Dora, and let me see. 10,000. Wait, increase. Let me see. I click here. See if that gives me. Okay, so
She's on the Journal of
Scroll
Experimental
down.
Zoology.
this concerns posterior midguts of tobacco hornworms. I thought I saw something in just the little search results on the previous page that said something about.
So we're 3 minutes into this now.
Let's see.
People
10,000.
typically spend around 30 to 45
What was
seconds.
it that I thought that I saw?
2 minutes after that, sparing you a lot of time here.
This over here.
She's on this incredibly technical paper.
Do.
She doesn't know how to pronounce Lepidoptera or whatever it is, right? Anyway.
So, how's it all worked out for us? Since April 11th, around 1 million people played a Google a day. We have an average visitor rate of 24,000 daily players. On average, each player spends around 6 minutes playing a Google a day and plays 3 days' worth of puzzles. Today's, yesterday's, and the day before. More importantly, from the email that's sent to googleaday.com and monitoring the Twitter stream, we know that players really do understand the point of the game. As Wired magazine reported, a Google a Day is a great way to learn how to search, both for you and for teachers. Interestingly, we seem to be attracting a large number of Firefox and Chrome users. 44.5% of players are using Firefox, while 21.9% are Chrome.
Yeah, it goes on and on like this, right? You get the idea. So what's interesting, though, was that last comment in Wired. It's interesting for both you and for teachers. Remember that, because we'll come back to that. But you see what we're doing is we're trying to see how people at this middle scale of behavior actually act. And so now let's turn our attention to the mega. I'm at Google. I can run analytics on these things, right? So what we have to do here is actually get a handle on these terabytes of data coming in and do something useful. Because, you know, here's a nice example, right? This is a regular Sunday looking at European queries. You can see the volume changing by day. This is World Football Cup. So this is Europe during the game. Volume diminishes significantly. That is halftime. You get the idea. We have all kinds of really interesting phenomena you can see. Now, this is, I'm telling you this from a Google perspective, but you can do this same kind of analysis on your website or your app, your mobile app or whatever. So the truth is, in the user experience world, we often live with a lack of knowledge. So logs are great. They do not tell you why someone is doing something. Right? That's an important point. You have to find out why someone is having that effective response by watching them. You have to go to their place. You have to go to their house and watch them do this stuff. Okay? So there's all kinds of stuff that goes on here. There are big seasonal effects. Saturday is not the same as Friday. The day after Christmas, Boxing Day, is not the same as the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve. New Year's Eve is totally different. You would not believe the number of increases in the search for champagne in the run-up to New Year's Eve. Okay? So there's all these things that go on here. But with analytics, we have a chance. But it's complicated. It's not just getting a number and watching that. Because sometimes these metrics go up and sometimes they go down. And so the truth is, even though we like to think of ourselves as data scientists, we're kind of data soothsayers. We look at the chicken bones, we look at the blood spatters, and we try to figure out what's going on. Because it's a multivariate problem. And in particular, not only is it a multivariate problem where some things are covariating and some things are anti-covariating and so on, but we can't often even run the same experiment twice. Because in our entire stack, all kinds of stuff, including the measuring devices, change constantly. So web science is really more like web soothsaying in many ways. It's not as cut and dried as you might like it to be. So the data scientists at Google who are the best at interpreting the entrails from the data set are the ones who understand how these variables vary and covary and antivary. There's a lot of background knowledge you have to do just by looking at a lot of this stuff. So in particular, for a Google a Day, I was really trying to make it all about the teaching. So I don't know how many of you can read German, but when we presented this in the United States, a lot of people instantly learned how to use Google Translate. Right? That's what I wanted to have happen. Because I could present this question over here and then go over to Google Translate and look at the numbers there. Bing! Big spike. Maybe I shouldn't say bing. Yow! Trademark, right? So this is what we had hoped to do, was to give all these different kinds of things, where we would teach people, right, something like this. What do you call those people? This is not obvious in the United States. Right? So we had a lot of fun doing this. And the analytics for this was fascinating. This was from, this is about the second month, June 2011. The last 2 weeks we had, 250,000 visits, 175 unique players. It's pretty good. But what I thought I'd show you are some interesting aberrations from the data. So for example, here's May 6th, where we basically quintupled instantly overnight. It's a Reddit effect, /dot effect. You get mentioned on Reddit, you get mentioned on /dot, bang. Right? Here we had a homepage promotion on Google, just google.com. We went up to 800,000 visitors in one day. Okay? So what's really interesting is you can see the sensitivity of your system to various exogenous manipulations. I can go poke this, I can put it on guardian.com, guardian.co.uk. And you can also start to see, if you zoom in a little bit, the sort of day-to-day behavior. So here's one question we asked on the 30th. We get a normal decline after that, and kind of goes up, it varies around a little bit, and declines, and tensions out eventually, right? But what's interesting is that then the next day we ran a second question, same pattern. Third day, same, well, slightly better response, but same thing. But what's happening is that all these things keep going out and long-tailing out forever. So there are still people playing, trust me, they're still playing this question 4 years later. These things never die. I didn't expect that. Now, one of the things that I was really hoping to be true was this analysis that we did. This is about, I guess, about a year in. And this weirdo graph basically says, if you have non-Google a Day players, we can do that by looking at their cookies. you have a unique fingerprint, right? So I don't know your name, but I know you got, you know, XYZ21-9, right? So I look at the number of queries per day made by that person or that cookie, and we see this tail distribution. The average is 6.6, right? We come over here and we look at the Google a Day players. Bang, 446% higher. Yes, I totally won. Because when I look at these queries, because I can pull them anonymously, I don't even know what the cookie is. I can just look at them side by side, and I can measure the kind of query that they're doing. These queries are far more interesting in terms of showing advanced skill development than these. I have achieved my goal. I know that these people are on more often, they're doing more queries per day, and they're using more advanced query methods. My game is succeeding in teaching people how to search more effectively. It's also interesting, you know, we did a few other versions of it. The Taiwanese group built the Chinese language. I hope somebody can read that because I can't. But it effectively doubled our market, which is fantastic. And you can see interesting things like this. That's a big oops on my part. And I didn't notice it until about here, and that's when I got this graph. So basically what happened is we have an advertising placement on all these web pages, and got to be, this is January 1st. Guess when the contract ran out? Don't! You know, so it runs for, you know, basically 2 weeks, and then I pick up, and we restart the contract, and everything goes back to normal. One of the big characteristics about this we learned is it's a reminded game. It's one of these things where you get reminded, oh yeah, Google Day, I'm going to go there, right? And play it for 5 or 6 minutes. One of the mechanisms we had was by using the New York Times. We would run these questions up above it, and then people would come to the site and then play the game and hang around for a little bit. And it's interesting to think about how do you measure the efficacy of your game, of your tool. Well, this is actually a scan of the New York Times from that day. And you look down here, I'll blow that up for you so you can see it. That's the Jeopardy question. So the Jeopardy game show is now running exactly the same format as we were, which I thought was amusing. You also know you've won when your company starts blocking my game. That's an interesting measure, right? It's so attractive that people want to stop you from doing it. And this is Google PDX provided this particular bar swag for their game. And we didn't do any of this. So people were starting to pick this up and run with it. We also learned a lot along the way. Okay? So whenever you're designing something, it's interesting to take note of the problems you have and how you solve those problems. So for example, we discovered it's really hard to write these good questions. I tried many, many different ways. I tried crowdsourcing it. That was impossible. There's all kinds of interesting things here. And these particular problems here were difficult because that's more complex than it seems. That one was particularly hard. The top one, a town in the western United States with a population of 1, he got married. What can I say? It blew my question. And so even things like this, you kind of constantly have to keep up on top of them, right? And sometimes, if you want to teach more advanced, more sophisticated features like search by image, we did it ultimately, but doing this one question took about 3 person weeks of coding to build. I wouldn't do it again. Right? So when you're doing these kinds of things, you have to figure out what the trade-off is. For one question, 3 person weeks, not worth it. It's a way cool feature, and I really wanted people to know how to do it, but it made the whole system fragile. So we ended up taking that whole thing out and reverting it because it was just too much middly code to try to support. So remember when I said, notice the thing about the Wired magazine and the teacher and all that? Well, one of the unexpected side effects of building this game was that teachers started to use it in their classes. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't thought about this. But in fact, as a designer, one of the ways you know you win is when people are using your tool, your system, your thing in a way that you hadn't anticipated. That's how you know you've taken this little thing you've designed, little thing you've built, and it's become part of something people can work with. Now they can start to do stuff on top of that. That's success in my book. So what happened is we did this, and I ended up producing so many teachers wrote to me, and ended up producing a paperback book of the questions and answers and comments. And we did a printing of 7,000 of them, and they're all gone. That's, if you're tracking these kinds of things, there are hardback books that you can buy at Waterstone that never have a press run of that big, right? So this is pretty good. So these are questions that then get used, and I can see in the log files classes coming in and classes going out. And it gets used a lot in the homeroom. So the very first period of the day in a lot of American schools, people play this as a way of getting into the topics.
A Google a Day provides daily trivia questions on a variety of subjects. Solving these questions is a fun and engaging way to teach students important online research skills. Let's take a look at how to use a Google a Day in your classroom with an example from south of the border.
Tenochtitlan.
A Google a Day questions are starting points for exploration with just enough material to get an active mind going. After answering these questions, there are many directions in which to go for deeper exploration on any topic. The mini lessons we put together are filled with ideas on using search to engage your class with the subjects you teach every day. Download one today and see where a Google a Day can take your class.
So we made this video after we discovered teachers were using it in their classes. I don't know what the last number is. Last time I looked at it, we had roughly 1 million views in that video. I have to say I didn't make the video. I wish I had. But it was done by our marketing team. But the key thing here is that we found that our product was being used in ways we hadn't anticipated. So we shifted. And now we support all of that as well. We've got another edition of that book coming out, doing some more videos like this. It was really gratifying for me as a designer to see that kind of uptake. So to give you a sense for it, let me kind of give you a whole picture for 1 year. This is 2012. When we look at 2013, it's kind of the same. It doesn't matter really. We had 27 million people roughly come and visit the site, all uniques. They spent on average 4 minutes. Remember what I said about earlier? They were spending about 6 minutes. Well, now we're getting more people who are smarter. Yes, I've cut 2 minutes off the search time. Right? This is fantastic. This is my happiest number here. Our bounce rate, that actually sounds terrible. It's actually not bad. That's a good number to have. And in this, it's sort of interesting to see, we stopped our advertising right about here, but we have enough sort of currency in the system that things keep going on for a while. Here we ran, I sort of experimentally ran a promotion for that period, and we can basically double our use rate. And we get other experiments, we remove one particular form of advertising. So it's very responsive. You see, that's basically a square wave. Marketing really works. You can turn it on, you can turn it off. The beauty of this is I can start to probe different channels. So this is one channel effect, this is another channel effect. Right? This is one of the things you get by doing analysis in the large. So from a design perspective, if I'm trying to build these systems, here's a couple of things to keep in mind. Design is kind of like it's always been. However, one of the neat things about what we're doing here is we cannot explore the entire space of all user interface configurations. Face it, you can't. What designers do is give you plausible points in that space. They take their best judgment and say, hey, if we do it this way, I bet it will work. Because think about it, the design space is almost infinite. It's gigantic. Colors, spaces, fonts, layouts, animation, interaction, flows, all that stuff. It's a giant, giant problem. So we rely on designers to give us skilled and articulate, valuable choices, and then we use our analytics to understand how to tinker with those designs. You can think about this as a kind of hill climbing algorithm. You identify plausible points in the space, and then you use analysis in this micro, meso, macro mode to figure out how to improve your designs. So one of the things about this is the world is full of counterintuition. And so this is really why we go with this sort of 3 scales of user experience research. We're looking at the mechanics, at the game mechanics, the moment-by-moment play behavior. We look at the meso behaviors. We're looking at the storyline behaviors that go over larger amounts of time. And ultimately, we're looking at the weeks and months behavior as well. Okay? So the bottom line for us here is that design is huge. Analysis at these different levels give us 3 different perspectives on what's going on. You've probably heard about our famous case of testing 41 different colors of blue with the link shades. And this is a nice story about the relationship between analysis and design, because the designers were convinced that shade number 23 was the best shade, it was the most attractive. And so we're skeptics. We tested 41 different colors of blue. Turns out, not only is that not the right color of blue, but it's significantly different in click-through rate than other colors of blue. And so it's not a secret. You can actually go read the code and see what the hex code is for the HTML. Go see what our blue is. But we know that that blue is more readable, has fewer errors, and has faster click-through rate, or faster click-through time. So I like being in this space where we have design informed by experiment, informed by analysis. I want to leave you with that thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions? Yes, sir.
To what extent have you tried to understand the actual learning effects? To what extent have you observed people change behavior as a result of playing?
Great question. Not so much here because we're dealing with millions of people. But I also do a lot of work in the MOOC space, the massive open online classes. And I've done a lot of work there to see exactly what works and what doesn't work. So early on, I was telling the story about people asking what's the definition of URL. And we did a lot of usability tests for that, and we actually instrumented those classes to see exactly how people would change their behavior. And we actually measured the increments. So people come into the class, come in at one level, and they get up to a factor of 4 better, and they, over time, drift down to merely a factor of 2 better. And I can go into great detail about that, but we have done that. And that was a tricky experiment to do, but we know that the learning is effective, it's efficient, and it's persistent. So, worked out well.
What were you learning in that case?
Sorry?
What were they learning in that case?
More search skills.
Oh, search.
Yeah, my life is teaching people how to search. Any other questions?
Why is it so difficult to ask a good question?
Writing trivia questions is an art, it turns out. I didn't realize this. I just thought, But when I tried crowdsourcing it at Google, because I thought, hey, a room full of really smart people could write 10 questions, we'd be done. We'd be out of here, right? But it turns out that people have very different notions about what constitutes an interesting question. And so I wrote a rubric for what makes a good question. And it turns out people have a really hard time inventing that.
Did you test your questions?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, when you put them in here, you're testing them, right? But for example, one guy wrote a series of 20 questions all about heraldry, which is interesting, one for 1 or 2 questions, but not 20. Or this is a typical Googler kind of response. What's the first 10-digit sequence in the expansion of pi that's relatively prime? Nobody cares, right? I mean, that's a Googler, job interview question. That's not a normal person question. And so that was a huge part of the problem.
Because we, as instructors, have a really hard time asking good questions for our exams, and we all put it off. We all hate coming up with a really good question. And I just wonder, is there some deep psychology about how we read text and how we try and...
It's, I don't have a great answer for you, but it is tricky, and you're right. It's really tricky. The other thing that makes this difficult is that people might ask a really difficult question like, what do you call a red lion that's rampant upon a field of maize, right? Well, you Google that and you find it out, right? You get the answer in 1 second. That's not a question, right? That's a lookup problem. And so these often have to be constructed in a way so that the obvious question, the obvious search, does not give you the answer immediately. And one way to do that is to link the questions together. So in what year did Alexander Graham Bell fly a kite that then had a side effect on the planting of tulip bulbs in New Jersey? Right? So you actually have to do two problems. And nobody has both of those in one document. So you actually have to get piece from here and then piece from here. So it's the kind of conjoining that actually makes it sometimes hard.
So if I understood correctly, you're not testing them before they launch, but of course over time you gain experience in how people respond. So maybe in that process you do learn about asking questions.
Well, what we actually do is we write the questions and then I hand them to you, right? And it's one of those things where you develop an eye for it over time. It's a little bit like doing logs analysis. You start to understand what kinds of things will work and what kinds of things won't work. Then we put it in there and we see what the response is. If 90% of people can't get it in less than 5 minutes, take it out. Right. So we do two levels of tests to kind of share it with you. Then we put it in the system and see what happens. So, yeah.
Put it on to the other side. So, how do what makes a good searcher? What's the change in strategy?
That's a different talk. I can give that now if you want. A good searcher basically knows two things: tactics and strategy. Tactics are things like using different operators in different situations. So, for example, how to use the site colon operator. Everybody knows site colon? Okay. Say site colon, nytimes.com. Searches only that site. Okay. So those are the sort of tactical things, how to do that. The strategic things are, for example, knowing how to look around a topic in order to gain the vocabulary in order to frame your question correctly. So if I ask you a question about, say, some disease that's particularly obscure, right? Some virus you pick up in South Africa, you're going to have to go learn a little bit about that field before you can actually then frame the question. So it's actually a combination of both of those.
Contrast out the earlier video when you showed these classic trivia quizzes you're not allowed to Google.
Right.
But here you're saying, well, let's let you do this.
Yeah.
But I think you're still arguing that domain knowledge is very important.
I have a talk exactly that, which is you still need to know a lot in the age of Google. It's absolutely true. Yeah, so I think there's a false belief that a lot of people have. If I have Google, why do I need to go to school? Well, that's, there's still a lot you need to know.
There's plenty of evidence for
that. Yes. Yeah.
A related question. You showed a figure at the end saying that search time would increase from 6 minutes to 4 minutes, which seems to show that on the meso scale, Google is Google searches are getting better. Can you test at the micro scale as well? Use the Google a day?
So that's a great point. That number is an aggregate of millions of people, right? So what I'm seeing are mass effects, herd effects, right? If I test you or you or you, it may take me 100 people before I start to see that effect. And so the famous naive statistics models of Tversky and Kahneman, right? How terrible we all are at that. Well, doing this kind of work makes you appreciate that really well, because I've run not millions, but I've learned a lot of different kinds of sample sizes and effects and all this, and all that stuff is true. Statistics is really true and fantastic. And crank up the N, you look at the power of the statistic, and you look at all those classic measures, and damn if it doesn't work, So it's impressive. And I can get an N of a couple million, which makes my error bars like that.
You can't bring a couple of million people on a track.
Exactly. Although we've recently developed an interesting technique, I'll just mention this as a segue. The mobile phone is basically a tiny little screen, right? And so when people scroll around on that, what they're effectively doing is telling you what they're paying attention to on the screen. And that becomes a proxy for eye tracking, right? It's sort of a fascinating thing. Vijaya Navakapam has a couple papers on this where we talk about how to do that. And so it's not exactly the same as eye tracking, but it definitely shows you where focus of attention is on the page. And so we can do that for millions of people. And then when you combine that with scroll bar position effects, or if you do mouse tracking, because it turns out like a third of all people, so roughly this part of the room, use their finger or their mouse as an eye tracker. It floored me the first time I saw this in a field study. The person was taking their mouse and absolutely moving it all over the screen. What are you doing? And they're using it as a visual marker, so their eye follows the mouse, everything they read.
You just need to keep track of where the cursor is.
Yeah, we have a lot of evidence. I mean, we've actually done some of these studies where we can see people do that a lot. The other thing that people do is they will follow along for a while and they use it for cursor marking, which is they will put the cursor on the thing that they think is the current best hypothesis, the best search result, and they'll keep reading, and they go click. Right? Because they look for the rest of the page, they haven't even moved their eye up, and they go click. So it's a fascinating whole realm of interesting stuff that we've done there in the large. Right? So you can take your website, for example, and do this little bit of mouse tracking, and you can see where focus of attention is and where anti-attention goes. And where people are not clicking because they just never see it. Anybody else? All right.
Okay, and before I give a final thanks to Dan for a wonderful talk, as is tradition with a distinguished lecture, we will have free wine and nibbles. I can never say that word with a straight face. We will have on the 5th floor of computer science, so that's in the next building. You're all welcome to come along. So I'd just like to give another round of thanks to the